Welcome everyone to the last of the 2020 AMPC webinars, getting close to the Christmas period. Today we're lucky enough to have Evie Murdoch from KPMG and Ken McKell from AMIC online, and we've also got Katie that will be joining us shortly. She's just wrapping up another meeting. So today KPMG are getting sort of close to finalising the stage 2 of the visa project. So we thought it was a really good opportunity for us to be able to talk about the journey so far. So I guess where all of this started was AMPC went around and visited a number of plants over 2 years ago, where we were listening to what keeps people up at night. And one of the big themes that came through was visas and the amount of red tape and the difficulties people have around the visa process, etc. So we first of all undertook stage 1, and that was a really good platform for us to be able to find out what all those issues were. So KPMG reached out to a number of processors and also did a meeting in Tamworth, which they'll go in detail more with shortly. And from that sort of commenced that stage 1 project. We then had a series of recommendations and a series of policy positions. And so with the collaboration and assistance of AMIC, we've been able to really work really closely and really well together, I believe, in this project, the 3 organisations, to be able to formulate some really good potential outcomes for the industry. So I'll let everyone talk about those as we go through today. So just want to thank, as we start today, Ken and Patrick from AMIC, who have been instrumental in doing a lot of the advocacy work and a lot of the government engagement meetings, as well as Evie and Katie, Warwick and Georgie from the KPMG team, who have been working in the background to be able to create all the supporting documents, undertake the surveys, etc., so that we've actually got some really good data and some really robust information to be able to inform, that AMIC can use to inform government. So thanks everyone for joining. If you've got any questions today, we really encourage questions. Please go to your question toolbar and type in the question, and at the appropriate periods we'll revert back to those questions and try and answer as many questions as we can today. So thanks very much. Over to you, Evie.
Thanks, Amanda. Good introduction there, thank you. So what we're going to do today is run through the agenda that hopefully you can all see on your screens now. What we're going to do is run through the kind of overview process of where we've come from and where we've been in the last 6 months or so on this government extension journey in particular. Katie and I are going to walk through some of the activities that we've been doing in the background to help set up AMPC and AMIC with the government extension activities. And then we're going to pass to Ken to help comment on those and some of the next steps that are being taken. We've also got a number of final recommendations that we'll cover off at the end that are going to fall through from this piece of work. And we're really excited for the red meat industry to see how those recommendations are taken on board by both government, and also to see those benefits flowing through to you guys as the industry. As Amanda said, really happy to take questions throughout. She's going to help us be the question master. So if you've got questions, use the functionality on your go-to toolbar to pop those questions in, and we'll take a moment at the end of each section to pause and answer those questions as best we can. And if we have anything that we can't answer for you today, we'll make sure we take those things offline and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Just a reminder that we are recording the webinar, so you'll be able to access this at a later date if you'd like. And also just more broadly, to give you some idea of the timelines we're working through, we are finalising our last government extension activities today, actually, after this webinar. After that, we'll be reporting back to AMPC, and there will be a report available on the activities that we've done this year sometime in the new year. So keep an eye out for that as it gets published. All right, I thought it would be a good opportunity to start us off this afternoon by looking at a project overview on a page, and to see where we've come from, what we've done this year, and the proposed next steps. So as Amanda briefly outlined at the beginning of the session today, we started back at the beginning of last year almost, doing some background research on some of the issues and problems that you guys as the red meat industry face, particularly as they relate to people and the workforce. And one of those, as Amanda noted, was the visa issue. So what we were brought in to do was to conduct a consultation period with a number of processes to have a really good conversation and to start to map out what those issues were and why those issues were coming through to the fore. And also to look at other visa systems internationally. So we had a look at some of the EU, some of the Pacific Islands, and also particularly at the US and Canada, to look at how their agricultural industries and their visa systems operated. What we landed with was a number of areas of interest, and we took those to a workshop in Tamworth in October of 2019 and had an opportunity to air those thoughts with you and to get some feedback on those and to start to form some strategic policy recommendations. We ended up with two clear strategic policy recommendations, and I'll go into those on the next page. But the number one thing that we realised was that we had these recommendations and they were backed up by some really fascinating consultation conversations, but that particularly we lacked some really robust and detailed data to back up those recommendations. So that the first thing we did this year in our phase 2 was to put out a survey to you as the processors to give you an opportunity to provide us that data in a really granular level. So what we've done is gone out with that survey. We left it open for about 3 weeks, and we got a really good response rate on the granular information we needed to back up our policy recommendations and the things that we were going to go to government and ask for with the help of AMIC. What we're going to cover off later on in the session today is how that government extension has gone, and Katie will introduce the process we've gone through with that, and Ken will talk to the conversations that AMIC's helped lead over the course of the government extension, and there were 10 meetings. As I said, there's one more thing to happen this afternoon, and that will actually end up being 11 meetings, and we've had some really interesting conversations with government on some of the grievances that we've raised, as well as the policy recommendations that we put forward. Falling out of this phase 2 piece of work, there is 6 key pieces or 6 key recommendations that we're going to leave AMPC and AMIC with at the end of this process, and that will round out our stage 2 project, and we'll start to give you an idea of what those look like as we get towards the end of today's webinar. What we'll also cover off is a couple of pieces that have fallen out of government, not necessarily as part of our distinct strategic policy recommendations, but there have been 3 key visa and migration related opportunities to engage with government this year outside of the meetings we've had, and we'll talk about those processes as we get through the webinar today. What I thought I would cover off first is just that reminder of the 2 strategic policy recommendations that we did have from the last phase of work. And one in particular was a meat industry labour agreement that works for you, and a particular focus for that is on building flexibility in the system, reducing the administrative burden of the system, and particularly reducing the cost of the system. And where we've heard a lot of commentary from you both through the consultation and the survey, particularly related to things like training costs, the SAF levy, putting up accommodation and transport for visa holders, and also securing them longer term. And that really flows then into our second strategic policy recommendation, is that we wanted to secure a more expanded pathway to permanent residency for visa holders in the red meat industry. And what we mean by that is particularly focusing on those, what we would call good workers in our consultation, is those who are really interested in staying in the country but aren't necessarily on a visa that facilitates that or permits that. And what we wanted to do is engage government on how we could have a conversation that would allow a more expansive pathway to do that. What I thought would be an interesting thing to add in here as well is it's been a particularly challenging conversation to have these conversations with government at the moment because of COVID, but COVID has highlighted the need to secure the workforce in a longer term way over the last couple of months for sure. So it's been really interesting to be pushing forward on this expanded pathway to permanent residency discussion, but it's been an interesting one given the number of visa holders in the country at the moment is significantly lower than it has been for the past 5 or 10 years. All right, I'm going to carry on with just one more section from myself here, but I welcome questions on anything from the phase 1 activities or outcomes, as we said, Amanda's happy to push those through to us as we go, so feel free to ask questions. So what I wanted to pause on next was the industry survey. This was our first key milestone of the second phase of work. And as I said at the beginning of the webinar, the reason we're doing the survey, or we did the survey, was to really build up some robust data that validated and supported our 2 strategic policy recommendations. And we had 3 key areas of questions that we asked processors. The first one was some, I guess you call them demographic or administrative questions to understand where you were located, the size of your business, the type of business you operated. Then we asked questions about your workforce to better understand how you secure your workforce, the kind of training you deliver to your workforce, the type of skills or non-skilled positions that you seek, and the type of training that you might offer to those people to upskill if there is an opportunity to do so. And the third section in that survey was all about the use of visas in your business. Not every processor that responded did use visas, but we still secured a lot of robust data on their workforces nonetheless. All of that information has been de-identified for the purposes of having conversations with government, and we've used the term processors to talk about the information collectively. One thing I thought it would be really interesting to comment on here is we leveraged a KPMG team that we work alongside with here, who does a lot of customer intelligence and survey work for various different projects that we run. And they told us that the survey response level was as expected, so the data that we were coming up with was robust enough to support the arguments we wanted to make. So I think it's worth commenting on that to say a big thank you to those who spent the time completing the survey. We do know that it took between 15 and 30 minutes to do. We do see those time scales coming through when we see your responses. So a big thank you to us, from us to you, for your support in participating in that program. We did actually tack on some additional questions to that survey, particularly that related to COVID. It was a good opportunity to engage with you on how COVID was impacting your workforce. At the time the survey was running, it was May, as a reminder, so that might seem like a long time ago in this interesting year that we've had, but it'll be interesting to engage with you again shortly, I'm sure, to test how that's gone and impacted your business, and to see how your workforce issues have fluctuated or reduced with COVID or not. So we look forward to keeping in touch and seeing how you've gone with that. What I'm going to do now is just step through the 2 policy recommendations. I've got one page on number 1 and a second page coming on number 2, and just show you particularly where some of the data really backs up the policy asks that we were showing to government. And this is the reason in particular why we used the survey data, because it really evidences the requests we were trying to make of government. And I guess it's a good point for me to add here that this is not all of the data or all of the results, and there's a lot more information that we can draw from the survey if we need to, but it doesn't necessarily relate directly to the recommendations that we've taken to the strategic policy positions. So we've provided that data to Amanda, and there's plenty more uses for it, I'm sure, as that data is built up over time. And it was one of the first opportunities to put out a survey to all of you to respond to, should you have wished to have done so. Okay, so strategic policy recommendation number 1. As I mentioned earlier, this one is all about flexibility in migration programs, and particularly looking at visas and the MILA, the Meat Industry Labour Agreements. So what we heard from you in phase 1, and it was emphasised in our phase 2 survey, was that the support provided to you by the government is not necessarily the best in terms of visas, and there was a lot of issues with the inflexibility in the system. So what we did was use some of the survey data to back up the asks that we had in our strategic policy recommendations. So just to run through some of those findings for you, we found very clearly that the larger processor plants, both by size but also in number of locations, were the most reliant upon visas, but also bore the cost of visas the most. So there was a large cost outlay at the top end of the size spectrum in terms of processes. That nearly all visa labour used went to the visa labour source because they were struggling with finding local workers, both skilled and unskilled. And some of the commentary that was coming through the survey in the open text fields was around an inability to find long-term local labour, a dissatisfaction with the concept of working in the red meat industry from an abattoir perspective, and an unwillingness to be upskilled, to become a skilled worker in the red meat industry, so doing the appropriate training. Another one that we did see a little bit, and this was also mentioned to us in conversations from phase 1, was the need to do a pre-employment medical, and the fact that some people weren't able to pass that from an alcohol or drug perspective, and that was an issue with sourcing local labour. We also found that, particularly with some of our COVID-related questions, that even though local labour was a preference for most of the processes, they had to turn to visa labour because the recruitment strategies that they were using locally still weren't having any impact on securing that long-term local workforce. So what this is evidencing is that the red meat industry still has a high reliance on visas, and even if they employ good local workforce strategies, that it can be very hard to secure sufficient volume of labour, and that we really need to work with government to make the process of using visas easier, given that the long-term reliance that the industry is going to have on this type of labour. We asked a number of questions around the types of wages used with visa holders compared to non-visa holders, particularly as it relates to the use of the TISMET. And there was still variation between the wages paid to local staff and visa employers, and it evidenced the fact that the TISMET barrier is an issue for some processes when it comes to employing visa labour. Nearly all plants had an on-the-ground training program, but what we found through the survey results is that the cost of training, particularly unskilled labourers, is very high, and more often than not we know that the processes bear the cost of this, and there is a lot of double dipping for those processes that have to pay the SAF levy, given that the local labour supply is not making use of the SAF funds being put through the tertiary training programs in the state system. And Katie can touch on this as a recommendation falling out of our work, that the government is now undertaking some process reviews on the SAF levy, and Katie can mention that for us later. The final point that I'll touch on here is the admin. More than 61% of you commented that the system was very hard or hard to navigate, and in many instances the fact that you had a MILA didn't necessarily benefit you from an administrative perspective, and 44% of you said that it's too expensive or difficult to even obtain a MILA, which is supposed to make the system easier to use as well. So there's just some comments coming through. I'm going to pass to the next slide now. Our permanent residency conversation was that the industry can't keep good workers. The average length of employment across plants varied significantly, and AMPC is doing some work at the moment in retention through Project 1058, and Response is leading this work, and there's some really interesting results coming out of this survey, and I'm sure Amanda can provide you some of the interim results if you'd like to know more about those through some of their milestone reports. But ultimately, it was found that high visa staff turnover actually has an impact upon the non-visa staff, and when processes are looking at their long-term local workforce, having a high number of visa holders turning over because they can't become permanent residents if they want to actually has an impact upon the local employees. More than 75% of plants that had visas would be very interested in having their visa holders stay longer if there's a mutual interest, but less than 33% of processors who have visas said they can use a visa that has a transition pathway to permanent residency. Finally, I thought it'd be worth saying that the most common visa still relied on by the industry is the 417, and that has no distinct pathway to permanent residency. And we saw the high use of that visa distinctly across all the processors who responded to the survey. Again, very happy to take any questions on this survey data that I've presented here today, as it supports the strategic policy recommendations. Otherwise, I thought it'd be worthwhile just adding a couple of comments here for you on COVID. We did provide these in the ready recommend that I know has gone out to industry, but just to make sure you're all aware of the rapid changing circumstances with some of the temporary activity visas as they stand. They give you an extension on duration for some of the industries, particularly agriculture, but also food and beverage, healthcare. There's a couple of others as well. Working holiday makers can count Agri as one of their eligibility pieces to extend their visas while COVID is on. There has been a number of Pacific Labour Scheme workers in the last couple of weeks who have come into Australia from the Pacific Islands, particularly into the Northern Territory, Queensland and Tasmania. So as a visa supply source, the Pacific Labour Scheme is starting to open up again. We are very aware that one of the barriers to using the PLS workers at the moment is the cost of hotel quarantine. The states all have various approaches to how they're supporting businesses engage in that process at the moment. So depending on where you are as a business, the state governments have different responses to that. So I know with Queensland there is some support funding available, where in Tasmania that the state government has agreed to, for want of a better word, foot the bill for some of the hotel quarantine requirements. Ultimately though, we are starting to see, as we're all obviously probably aware, a significant reduction in the instances of COVID here in Australia. So hopefully we'll see the need to have these temporary activity visas extended, minimised in the near term. The final COVID observation is the job trainer concessions. Scott Morrison announced about halfway through coronavirus as part of the job maker, job seeker, job trainer commitments are starting to flow through to the RTOs. So there is some clarity there around how to get local labour to benefit from those job trainer programs. A number of RTOs are obviously registered to support the meat industry skilled positions there. There isn't a lot of clarity, however, on how visa users or visa holders can access this job trainer funding. So we'll await to see what government permits in that instance. The next steps for the survey, simply there is some opportunities to put the survey back into market again in 12 to 18 months time and undertake some spot checks to see how the impact of some of this government extension activities has flown through to you as processes, and obviously we can keep putting that survey into market as many times as we need to build up the database of information on the use of visas in industry. That's largely it from me from the survey perspective. So just before I hand over to Katie and Ken to cover off the government extension, I do welcome questions on the survey data. Otherwise, we have some time for more questions at the end. So feel free to push those through.
I think there's just one question or two questions that have come through. So what does TSMIT stand for?
Yes, so the TSMIT is the wage. Oh, sorry.
You go.
I was just going to say the TSMIT is the wage level that is required to be paid to some of the visa holders. It's set by the government. It's a minimum wage standard for an annual salary. The challenge with the TSMIT is it's set similar to what you'd expect from any employee. There's an annual salary, it's around the 50 to 60K mark, and some leave days. The challenge that some of the processors reported back to us was if the processor employee took more leave days than is allocated in the annual payment TSMIT requirement, that the processor had to still pay to the level of the TSMIT. So that creates a disconnect between the actual amount of work done and the pay provided to that person. And in some instances, the processors were reporting to us that the TSMIT was higher or lower than their typical minimum wage. So it was creating some imbalance between the payments of employees.
Great, thanks. And the next question is, which I think I will be able to answer, is a summary of the survey results available. So as part of the final report on this project, the big standout survey results will be included as part of that project. We actually managed to get a lot of data, which is really good to help industry moving forward, and we can sort of slice and dice that so many different ways. So we will definitely include the sort of key take-home message out of that survey in the final report, which will be sent out either at the end of this year or the beginning of 2021. Thanks, Eve.
And Evie, I might just quickly add, with respect to the TSMIT, it's currently at 53,900 for 38 hours, and it hasn't been varied since 2013.
Thanks, Ken.
And we hope it doesn't get varied, of course.
All right, Katie, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Evie. So I'd like to run through the government extension aspect of this project, and I'll start by explaining what that is and then the steps that we went through, and then give you an overview of the meetings we've held with government, and I'll leave it to Ken to go into some more details about some of the really great outcomes we've been seeing. So to start off, government extension for us involves engaging with different levels of government depending on the policy issue that we're working with. And it can be on both sides of Parliament, and what we tend to do is engage with government at the strategic level and then also at the tactical level. So the strategic level being ministers, parliamentary committees, members of Parliament, and then the tactical level being the relevant departmental staff. So as you can see on the slide, we had 3 steps within this process. So KPMG, we put together a government extension plan for the project based on the recommendations. And our first step was to have this industry group workshop. And this gave us an opportunity to hear from industry about where they had themselves engaged with government, where they'd had some success, and to sort of give us a more of an understanding of where the allies, I suppose, were in government for the industry. So the next step for this was to then take that information and refine our plan. And as Evie said, we developed a plan inclusive of 10 meetings. This ended up expanding out a little bit as we went along, and I'll cover that soon. And then the final step onto that was the implementation, which was to arrange these meetings over approximately a 3-month period. To support these meetings, we also developed a briefing paper which outlined the key recommendations that Evie went through and used the data that was collected in the survey to support these points. And this was sent to all members of government that we met with and was particularly helpful. So overall, I'd say that the meetings with government have been, I'd say, particularly positive, and that's evidenced by the fact that we were able to get all 11 meetings that we sought. I think this really reflects the importance of the industry to this government, and also the importance of the issues raised in these recommendations. So all up, we would have met with 5 ministers across 6 portfolios, as well as offices of ministers and a number of departmental staff. So I'll start with the immigration portfolio. So we're able to meet with the Honourable Alan Tudge, Acting Minister for Immigration, as well as the Department of Home Affairs. Minister Tudge was enthusiastic about the issues, I would say, if you would agree, Ken, and he undertook to look into a number of the issues regarding labour agreements and visa processing. To support this, the department has been working with AMIC and a number of other industry representatives to progress the number of issues to support a submission to the minister, and I'll let Ken go into some further detail about that after I've summarised our meetings and where that's going next. So in terms of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, we met with the Office of the Prime Minister, one of his advisors, and her key recommendation out of the meeting was to engage with the deregulation task force, and this is currently being led by the Honourable Ben Morton, Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister, and that meeting is our last meeting this afternoon. We also met with the departmental representative for the task force, who again was enthusiastic, I believe, and recommended us engaging with the minister, and also noted that there would probably be some other opportunities for industry to raise some of the other issues in regards to regulation, particularly in the area looking at duplication between state and federal government regulation. So the next meeting after that was with, or our next meetings were with Department of Agriculture. Evie, if you wouldn't mind popping, thank you, to the next slide. So we're able to meet with the Office of Minister Littleproud as well as the department, and similar to the Minister for Immigration, and I would say it's our experience that we also had with the Minister for Trade and Investment, as well as the Minister for Education and Minister for Industry, is that they were all enthusiastic and could see the issues being raised by AMIC and could understand the pressure that the industry faced. They were enthusiastic about engaging with their cabinet colleagues to promote these issues. So what we're hoping to do is, through the work that the Department of Home Affairs is currently progressing and through the Deregulation Task Force, is to give them a mechanism to engage and to support these issues. I will also note that the Minister for Education was also interested in how the red meat industry could promote a pipeline of workers through partnerships with universities. The issue of attracting the local workforce was raised in a number of meetings, and I can let Ken add some more detail about some of the things that AMIC have said that they're working on in terms of attracting and retaining staff to the industry. So another aspect of government extension is also developing submissions for various inquiries that the government may have on at any different time. So this can include parliamentary committees or departmental inquiries. So in this case, we were able to work with AMPC and using, again, that really valuable survey data to develop a submission for the Select Committee on Temporary Migration, and then also a submission to the Agricultural Workforce Strategy inquiry. So in terms of the progress of these committees and inquiries, the Select Committee on Temporary Migration is currently reviewing submissions. It won't report back to government or to Parliament, sorry, till August 2021. So hopefully we will hear something sooner rather than later on that one. In terms of the agricultural workforce strategy, this one is currently with government. So the committee that developed that has provided it to government, and they'll be considering it and will provide their response. I imagine they'll release both at the same time. The other interesting inquiry that was going on at the same time as these was the Working Holiday Maker program. This has been released, and there's been a number of interesting recommendations out of that one as well. AMPC didn't provide a submission to this one as it was running, I think, just prior to the Temporary Migration Committee. So in terms of our next, sorry.
I'm happy to provide a comment there if you want, Katie, just on the outcomes of that one.
Yep.
Just as we discussed, the Working Holiday Maker program has, the recommendations from the committee have been to extend that program, but there has been some recommendations relating to increasing the oversight and ability of employees under that program to raise issues, as the committee did acknowledge that there was a number of questions raised around the care provided to working holiday makers from an industrial relations point of view. I think the one comment that we would make in regards to that, and I know there has been some media on this recently, is the use of the working holiday maker has been particularly vocal in the horticulture industry, and particularly even just in the last couple of days with blueberries, but the no red meat industry sectors have been called out at all by any means. So nothing negative coming out of that review in regards to meat processors at all at the moment, and it's good to see these recommendations coming through from the Working Holiday Maker program overall. So a positive outcome there, I think, for us. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Evie. And we might just jump back a slide. Sorry, I know I've gone a little bit out of order. So in terms of the progress of the recommendations, and I invite Ken to also jump in here because he's been working quite closely with the Department of Home Affairs on this one. And at the moment, as I said, the department have progressed a submission to the minister covering off on a number of the issues in relation to the MILA, including looking at the TISMET, reviewing in-country certification requirements, the English language proficiency requirements, and labour market testing, as well as the requirements for a MILA holder to be the director employer. So Ken, if there's any other comments you'd like to add on some of that work that you have been doing?
Yeah, look, thanks for that, Katie and Evie. Look, probably without rehashing what's already been said and what's expressed on those slides, with respect to the discussions that representatives from AMIC as well as from KPMG have had with the 10 meetings so far and the final one this afternoon with ministers and with department heads, we most definitely have had a positive result from when we explain the circumstances and the issues to these ministers. Some of them are already aware of it, and I'm not just talking about the briefing paper that was provided to them as a matter of a number of days before the meetings, but through the discussions with their colleagues in caucus or otherwise. So, and more particularly in relation to the meat industry, let alone the agricultural industry as a whole. The responses that we've had with those discussions and the questions that have arisen in relation to what is the meat industry been doing or is doing, not only with respect to numbers of visa workers or the difficulty of trying to get visa workers under the current COVID situation, but also in relation to local workers, Australian workers. And with that, most definitely, we've relayed the clear picture and the feedback from the industry that the labour market testing requirements that they have, whether they're through a MELA or otherwise, in getting workers and retaining workers is very difficult for the industry. And for that matter, COVID has not only not really made a difference as far as the need for those workers and the shortage of workers, but more so the fact that it has actually made it worse. Obviously, with the fact that you can't get workers into the country, other than the slowly but surely opportunities to get it through the Pacific Labour Scheme 403 visa system at the moment, even though that's significantly down on what's required. But also the fact that talking about temporary visa workers, the 417s, the fact that there are quite a few of those still in the country, getting an extension that the government provided earlier didn't go far enough, hasn't gone far enough. And the fact that a number of processors have contacted us, and we've had, to a degree, some hookup arrangements with the Department of Home Affairs about trying to get applications processed and extensions as well as MELA applications processed as soon as possible. And some of those have gone on to much longer time than necessary. So there are other things that we're pursuing at the moment, but most definitely raised those during the discussions that we had with the ministers and the department heads. The other thing I'd like to mention is that each of these meetings where we have highlighted the fact of the problems of the labour shortages in the industry, both from a visa front as well as a local Australian workers, is the flexibilities that are contained within these two main recommendations, or multiple aspects of these two recommendations, need to be fast-tracked. As a consequence, and I will specifically point, I'm not saying that each of those discussions haven't been fruitful, but particularly with the discussion that we had with Minister Tudge, highlighting the concerns outlined not only in the paper, in the briefing paper, but also what we put forward. He consequently had a couple of people from policy, which has been mentioned, as far as deregulation task force, but he also prompted that within a matter of 2 days, AMIC received a phone call from the Department of Home Affairs formulating a meeting to go through each of the recommendations contained in the briefing paper. As a consequence of that meeting, which was around about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, there was, and it was contained on slide 8 as to subject matter, but as you can see there, a number of those at the top of the page on the current slide. And actually, if you're able to go over, I think a couple of slides, whoever's controlling it, Evie or Katie, it's the first slide that's got the limitations in the table. So you might just keep going. I think it's
Sorry, I think we actually took that one out of this
Ah,
particular deck just because of
okay.
the amount of words on the page.
That's fine. I
Sorry,
can
Jen.
elaborate. I can elaborate as we
Sorry.
go. That's
You're doing
fine.
an excellent job.
All right. Well, look, I suppose just based on those dot points that are on that top of that page 10, I mean, that's a general outline of the subject matter. But to be more specific, there was an issue regarding if you're a multi-site operation and you've got multi-ABNs that are contained in multiple, say, MELAs. Our proposal was to permit them under one MELA with a 5-year renewal process option. As a consequence, that's one of the items that not only was discussed with the Department of Home Affairs, but they've acknowledged that that's one of the items that they have put already in a letter back to Minister Tudge as recommended changes. I'll just go to the other ones that were in the recommended changes in the letter back to Minister Tudge. The next one related to what's been mentioned, the TISMIT, and the issue that I think Katie or Evie mentioned regarding where excess leave is taken and there's still the requirement to meet the TISMIT. So we've asked that to be considered on the basis that TISMIT leave loading should be commensurate with salary conditions of Australian workers. So that's another item that that the department is pushing for recommended change. The next one related to labour market testing. And if I can be specific, I'll just go to the proposed solution, and this is what's included in the letter to the Minister, to reduce requirements for labour market testing, that is, to utilise an annual review, not a per position review, or consider broader industry labour market data instead of per MELA user data. Another item related to a review of the MinTrack in-country, so wherever they're obviously coming from, certification processes to consider other mechanisms for verifying skills and qualifications. The major point with respect to that is that it would be a collaboration program should be developed to work as a whole of industry rather than, again, on an individual MELA or individual company level. So that's another recommendation that has gone to the Minister. The other one which subject has been mentioned is regarding the English language testing level. So what we've recommended to the department and subsequently to the Minister is to create a non-binary English language proficiency test, which could align to MinTrack assessor being able to confirm the applicant's English speaking skills, that acknowledges the communication needs to be achievable, but high levels of literacy may not equate to a good communication or to be required to undertake the required meat processing task. So in other words, we're saying that it should equate to what the requirements are for the role, and therefore it should be flexible with respect to the English language level requirements. So that that covers the items, the ones I've mentioned just then, that are in the letter to the Minister. There is a cross-section, obviously, of other recommended strategic changes that were in the briefing paper. They're not off the table. What I can say with respect to that moving forward is that the Department of Home Affairs have agreed that, look, we are committed with the industry and with AMIC, AMPC to discuss those issues further, to look at flexibilities in these other areas. But what they've said is why they can't give a direction or a recommendation of the Minister at this stage for those remaining items is that in most occasions it requires legislative change. So therefore it's a little bit a longer process, but as I say, definitely not on the table for further change. That being said, AMIC has not received at this stage a response from the Department of Home Affairs about the Minister's response. We hope to think that that's going to come through preferably before Christmas, but we'll be onto the department to at least get an update with respect to those items. All that being said, if there is positive change and recommended by the Minister, then we'll be putting the wheels in motion and notifying the industry with respect to each of those items for proposed changes. Look, I should mention on the other side of the ledger, if I call it that way, we've talked primarily about visas, and of course that's part and parcel of the project, but equally with the discussions that we've had with these ministers in particular, and to some degree with these department representatives, is that the meat industry, in conjunction between AMIC, AMPC, and certain other key stakeholder bodies in the meat industry, are working on programs and have been working on programs to boost local Australian workers into the industry. Now, whether that be, if I could say, from the AMIC perspective, that we have applied for a number of federal government grants. More recently, we have been successful and partaking in a partnership arrangement with the Department of Employment, Skills and Education on what's called a PATH program. And in a nutshell, what that's dealing with is to co-design an employment work plan for the meat industry, and this is all sectors, not just processing, that looks at all current government programs for employment, for employed, unemployed, youth, older workers, etc., to use that as a promotion, not only of the industry, but also to source workers and to use their programs, if I can put it that way, that currently apply. But in addition to that, to also do additional programs that can be created through the work plan for the meat industry. So we will, of course, not only be keeping the meat industry up to date with what's going on, but we will be seeking your input for ideas and suggestions as well. So that's a program. That program is for the next 2 years. So
Ken,
I may have spoke. Yep.
Thanks, Ken. We
I
might
might have overboard a bit, but yeah, just want to get the message across.
There's just been a question coming, Ken, for you before we move back to Katie. These are really valuable program improvements that will improve the system. Has there been any discussion with the Department of Home Affairs regarding the length of time it takes to get applications approved?
Yes, there has. I'll say not just with the department, but with the ministers as well in all the discussions. So this issue about whether they're individual applicants, visa applications, or MELA applications, whether for new or renewals, we've raised these things as to the frustration of the industry as to why they are being held up. There have been a couple of meetings directly with the department about it as well, with individual plants in some occasions, but most definitely we are pushing that even further. The responses we get aren't quite satisfactory, but they know, if I can be as bold as to say, the rage and the clear frustration the industry has over this and the effect that it's having on the industry as well. So most definitely we've put that forward and will continue to do so.
Thanks, Ken. I think we'll hand back over to Katie.
Great, thank you. So we might just pop onto our next steps. So as Ken said, AMPC will support AMIC to continue working with Department of Home Affairs on those remaining issues. They're all still on the table. And in parallel to that, as I said earlier, we're going to be meeting with the Minister for the Deregulation Task Force this afternoon to promote these issues as well and to see if any of those can be picked up through that mechanism. As noted, there is the reports for the agricultural workforce strategy and for the temporary migration inquiry. When these reports and the relevant government responses are released, there is an opportunity for AMIC and AMPC to make a response to these, particularly where there's recommendations that are relevant to the red meat industry and specifically to the issues that have been raised, or potentially if there is no specific recommendations, the response could relate to, well, why not? Why aren't these being addressed? And then the final recommendation from my part is that the Department of Employment, Skills and Education will be undertaking a review of the SAF National national partnership agreement next year, and there may be opportunity for industry to engage in that through a consultation process as well. And then I think the last one for data is your Evie.
Yeah, just as I said earlier, that we're supportive of AMPC continuing to use the survey structure to keep building up their data and to do some check-in points whenever they feel necessary, just to keep the data in an updated format, and to simply keep using it as a source of information for ongoing work. And as we've heard from Ken, AMIC obviously has some items on their agenda to keep pursuing from their end as well over the next 12 months or so. We're happy to spend a couple of minutes taking any additional questions. Amanda, has anything come through at all that we can help answer in the next 8 minutes?
No, you've obviously done a very good job explaining everything, the three of you, so well done. If anyone does have any last minute questions, feel free to put them through to us now.
Thanks, Amanda. And again, from our point of view, a big thank you to the industry for participating in this process. We know that undertaking some of the survey questions, things can be a little bit arduous, but we hope that we're really delivering some benefit and value, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and to continue to support AMPC and AMIC on the program in terms of securing some more flexibility and better outcomes out of the visa system. So a big thank you from Katie and I, and also from Georgie and Warwick, our two other team members who have been supporting us here as well. So a big thank you from our end as well.
Great, thank you. So I guess just in closing, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to send them through. But just in closing, on behalf of AMPC, we'd like to thank the KPMG team and also the AMIC team, especially Pat and Ken, for the work that they've done, being able to take the research. It's been a great project and sort of a test case project to a certain degree in how well the two organisations can work collaboratively to be able to support the whole of industry. So, you know, this project came from us listening to industry, and, you know, hopefully we will see some really good outcomes in 2021 as Ken and Pat continue to do the great work that they've already commenced. So no more questions have come through. So thanks everyone for joining today. In closing, as we indicated, the report will be due at the end of this year, beginning of next year. We'll make sure we'll get that out. In the meantime, this webinar was recorded today, so we'll also get that out. We'll include the final report from the stage 1 project, just so if anyone wants to go back and revisit that. We'll also include the Ready Reckoner that Evie mentioned in part of the presentation, in case you haven't received that, but everyone should have received that by now. And yeah, just like to thank everyone for their efforts and everyone from joining the series of webinars for 2020. AMPC are currently working on what next year looks like. We believe that the webinars have been really well received, so we're going to look to do a combination of the webinars and also probably an annual network meeting, but we're sort of in the throes of doing that. So if you've got any ideas on what you'd like to see moving forward for 2021, please reach out to me, send me an email. We'd love to hear what industry wants. So on behalf of AMPC, have a very Merry Christmas, everyone, and let's bring on 2021. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.